Welcome to this edition of the High Strangeness Factor. On the High Strangeness Factor, we explore all aspects of the paranormal and unexplained. There is, however, a special emphasis on what some call high strangeness areas, where seemingly dissimilar types of phenomena all occur in the same general area, such as UFOs, cryptids, and hauntings. We are interested in uncovering patterns that may not be apparent until one looks a little deeper. I'm your host, Steve Ward, and tonight I have a very special guest. Marni Kriby is a former host of Marty and Patty's Happy Hour show and a public speaker on the topic of personal growth. She has a Bachelor's of Science in Behavior Analysis and previously worked in the neuro rehab profession. Marni has been a lifelong experiencer and is now coming out with her stories in hopes to bringing a sense of ease to others who might be struggling with their experiences as well. Marni, thanks for being on the High Strangeness Factor.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure.
This is going to be fun. Marni and I met each other was last September at a great event that's held in Michigan. The first one was held last year, and there's another one coming up this year, the UFO Contact event held in Houghton Lake, Michigan. And for those that have no idea where that is, if you look at your geography and you look at the lower peninsula of Michigan, which looks like a mitten, go about what, Marni, 2/3 of the way up in the middle, roughly, and you'll find a nice little resort town, Houghton Lake. And Deb and RJ put together such an amazing event, first-time event, and we just had a really good time. Had you attended a lot of events like that before, Marni, or was this, it was just kind of a first time?
That particular event, a UFO event, definitely my first time, and I think it's the first time that was offered in our state. As far as paranormal events, I really was just introduced to them in the last couple of years.
Oh, okay.
And so, yeah, fairly new to me.
Well, it was great. I mean, we had I was privileged to speak there. I was the least known speaker of the group. We had some big powerhouses like Nick Redfern and Erica Lukes, Bill Konkoleski from Michigan MUFON, and it's such a well done event. And I understand you're going to be going to the one coming up this year.
I am very excited about that. That was my favorite event that I went to last year. Not that the other ones weren't great, but that one just really intrigued me, and I sat through every speaker. So it was really a good time. They did a nice job.
Yeah, they really they had a good crew. Mike Smith was a guy that they worked behind the scenes where if anything went wrong, nobody could see it. And the reason I like to talk about it, bring it up, is because there's a lot of unfortunately there's negativity in the paranormal realm, movement, or whatever, and there's a lot of backstabbing and so forth. But man, there wasn't any of that in this event, and we had such a good time.
Not at all.
Even
everybody.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say how personable it was. It was a very quaint event. The venue was great and the people were great, but we all had a chance to interact, and I just loved that.
Yeah, the after hours stuff was as much fun as listening to the speakers, and the speakers were all very accessible as well.
Very much so, yes.
And a very nice, a very picturesque area. So now I won't be there, be able to be there this year. It's the third weekend in September for those that may be in the area and want to travel there. I will be attending the Mothman Festival, which I do every year, and I'll talk about that some other time. But that's the Mothman Festival they hold every third weekend in September, and I'm afraid my heart belongs to Mothman. Besides, they've got me speaking there and introducing people and so forth, and even doing a tour. So, I wanted to ask you a little bit. Now, you have a radio experience yourself. You did a show where you and a co-host did the radio.
Yeah, a friend of mine out of Chicago. We started out on Blog Talk, and the show was Marni and Patty's Happy Hour, and the topic was all related to personal development, personal growth, with a spiritual twist to it, and with manifestation and the law of attraction. And we started out on Blog Talk, and then later I took the show to the local radio station here out of my area in Muskegon, Michigan, and we Skyped Patty in every Saturday. So we did that for a period of time, and then we just, with scheduling and other things going on in our lives, we ended our show. So, yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Well, that's great. A personal development show. Was it done with call-ins, or did you just do it as a podcast and then broadcast it later?
No, the original show on Blog Talk we did live. Well, both shows we did live, but when we did the one on Blog Talk, we did have a number for call-ins at that time, and we did have a few. When we did the one out of the radio station, that was a little bit more complicated for me to get my head around, so we did not do that. But they had a way that they could contact us through our radio show page if they wanted to provide input or ask questions, and they could do that privately as well. So.
Oh, very, very cool. Were there any, we'll get on to the other stuff soon. In fact, you are an experiencer, and we'll be talking about that, which even includes some very strange sort of Men in Black type experiences, if we can call it that. But were there any particular books, or there's a lot of so-called I'm familiar with people like Norman Vincent Peale and some of the local people in the Detroit area, and I've read another name, Dr. Joseph Murphy has written a lot of books along the personal development line, and I just wonder, were there any particular authors or books that you guys focused on or used as background?
Yeah, on occasion. There were always new books coming out. Really what got me started was Wayne Dyer.
Oh,
Dr.
Yes.
Wayne Dyer was originally from the Detroit area as well. And so that's what got me started. And there was a really cool story to that. That was a kind of a bit of synchronicity that actually, and through that's how I ended up meeting Patty. And not even in person at first, but connected through a friend, an old friend from high school. And anyway, we all ended up connecting through Facebook because we had similar interests, and it was really cool. But Wayne Dyer, that's where I got my start, and definitely Joseph Murphy, have read his books as well. So it's been a variety, and there's more emerging all the time. So I continue to read my personal development books. That's a huge part of my life, to keep my own self straight and to continue growing. And I still put it to use because people still will occasionally seek me out for, a listening ear or a little bit of wisdom or recommendations of books. But I haven't done any public speaking for a couple of years. But that was another thing that I did outside of that. So.
Well, that's very cool. I remember reading Dyer's Your Erroneous Zones, his first book, and it was electrifying. It was more than just to put it under self-help wasn't quite enough to describe what it was. It was very basic, very basic common sense, but there are ideas that sometimes people would not really think about in their day-to-day life. And it's amazing how he got to start too. But I was able to see him speak several times. in different venues, and he was always pretty amazing. So that's very cool that you were able to do that kind of a radio show. I don't know how long. How long this will last. I mean, this is a great venue, and I serve at the pleasure of the Paranormal UK radio people. But at some time in the future, would you like to co-host a show with me?
Oh, absolutely. Would love to.
Okay, that sounds good. Let's again, it could be a while, but yes, that would be something that would be a lot of fun. Okay, now, as you've said, you have had paranormal experiences really all your life from the time you were very young?
That is true. Yes. Yes. I have, you and I have talked about it a little bit. I've had a wide variety of experiences, which is in my own mind has complicated things for me. And, early on, my experiences were centered around what I just would, define as maybe a ghostly experience or a haunted experience. But again, like you and I have talked about too, that's just what was in my vocabulary at that time to be able to define things. Later, as life went on, there were a couple of other things that had happened that I couldn't quite fit into that box. And, after a while, they never left my mind. I didn't really talk about them much. I probably told a couple of people that something weird had happened, but those particular instances were just really hard to define for me. So I just let it go as one of those weird things, but really was hoping to one day come across a person or people who maybe could shed some light on it where I would feel comfortable enough to share it, which is what I found when I met you at the UFO Con.
Well, that's really great because you and I have spoken of Missy Lamontagne, who was a lady I interviewed about a month ago about her very strange contact experience, abduction experience, really. And you remember you talking about how impressed you were with the way she handled herself. And she was kind of in a situation very much like you, where here you have a normal person. And by the way, I will vouch for your rationality and your normalness.
No, thank you.
Yes, unless you're really hiding it, and I haven't been able to see that. But we'll leave that as a possibility. But you both normal people with great families and are exposed to, in her case, it was really, she was exposed to actually several different experiences that came out when I was talking to her. And I've always thought it's really great for you guys to come forward and talk about these things openly, because I was just talking to a friend of mine, Brian Zeller, who does the music for the show. And he said, there's probably hundreds, maybe thousands of people that have had bizarre experiences in their life, and they don't have anybody they can talk to. But if they were to if they hear a program like this, they can at least breathe a sigh of relief and think, thank God, I'm not crazy.
Yeah, exactly. And there's so many different things that factor into why people don't talk about it, whether it's, family belief systems. I was raised in a Baptist church. We went every Sunday. I went to a, children's or a youth church group every Wednesday. And there were just things, obviously, within their belief system that related to something like this was very negative or evil. And, that was a really tough thing for me, because being as young as I was when I started experiencing things, to then have, somebody in authority telling me that people who experience these things, or, are seers or whatever, are evil. And that these things could also be defined as, demonic, which in my opinion is just ludicrous. I was a very nice little girl, not an evil demon. So it did make things complicated in my own head. Now I can say, as far as my parents went, I never got that feeling from them that there was necessarily something wrong with me. But Mom did try to console me at times by doing what moms would do and just say, your eyes are playing tricks on you, or, you have a very good imagination and stuff
Right.
like that.
Well,
Which,
how young were you when these things were happening, and what kinds of things were you experiencing as a young child?
when I was really going back in time, I could say my earliest memory of anything was probably around, this is very young for a memory, but 3 or 4. And that's a guess. I just remember I have a very vivid memory of my bedroom, and I know timelines of because I moved bedrooms in that house a few times. So, but I was very young, and really, I specifically when I was that little, I have to say I just knew things, and I felt things so strongly, and I might have had a good imagination, but the fear was almost ridiculous, and I I remember, hearing things, feeling things in my room. I mean, some kids do. They're terrified of the dark or whatever it is. But I spent the first few years really having a hard time especially at night. I didn't sleep, and I would just scream and scream for my mother. I would see a light through the doorway that would just all of a sudden be there and then fade away. And it was kind of cute because at one time when my mom finally came into my room, she told me, again, we're going back to the church thing. She would say, "Oh, that's, the light of an angel, or it's Jesus," trying to make me feel better.
Right.
But that wasn't the feeling associated with it. It was absolute terror. And that house, it was a house that my family had built. So it's not like it's some old house that had a history to it. Who knows what the property had, but that really is neither here nor there, because I don't think all those things are necessary for any specific type of experience. Sometimes it's centered around an individual. And I wasn't the only one to experience something in that house. My mother did. She obviously looks for, the most rational explanation for stuff. So in her mind, she just thought people were coming into the house, which seems very unlikely since nothing was ever disturbed, nothing was ever stolen, and nobody ever saw them. So, lots of things were happening.
So did you see apparitions at all?
I did. I did eventually. I would see things move and I would hear things. But later down the road, I was a teenager at this point when my parents had left and they took my brother to that youth group at the church on a Wednesday night. And I stayed back because at that point I was too old for it. And I was sitting in my bedroom with my cat, and I heard, this was shortly after they left, and all of a sudden I heard all these dishes clinking around in the kitchen down the hall. And so I thought, well, that's weird because they shouldn't be back already. So I grabbed my cat and holding onto the kitty, and I peeked my head out the door. Well, there's a part of me that already knew. And I peeked my head out the door, and from the kitchen, from that space in the kitchen in front of the sink, you come out of that and you go around a little wall into the dining room, and then there's a stairway that went down to our family room. And there's this long trench coat kind of style. It was a long black coat with a black top hat. I did not see a face, and it moved so fast, saw it clearly, from the kitchen around that wall, and then just was like gliding right down the stairs, and I scared it. And my cat, all the hair stood up on the cat. She started hissing, and she clawed her way out of my arms and went just tearing after it down the stairs. I went back in my bedroom, sat up against the furthest wall away from the door with my knees up to my chest until my parents finally came home. And then when my mom got home, she could hear the cat crying. And we had a little storage room downstairs that was directly under our front porch. And she come up into my room and she says, why is the cat locked under the porch? And I didn't even tell her. I was too afraid to tell her because I didn't think that, she'd believe me. where I was doing drugs or whatever. But I didn't have a reason for it. I don't know.
Well, it's something that was actually corroboration with the reaction, with animal reaction to things like this. Then you would have to have imagined the whole thing, the apparition and the cat going crazy, and that's not terribly likely.
Right, and then the cat being shut in a room and left there, when she had clearly been in my room and in my arms. So, yeah, that one was really scary, really, really scary. Although it didn't do anything. Right. Like I said, I seem to have scared it away. But it was interesting to me because it was actually moving objects around. So it wasn't like something that just appeared and then disappeared on me. It was physically doing something in the house.
But it seemed like it was something with a top hat. It seemed like it was something in period dress, something from a long time ago.
Yeah. That's how I saw it. It definitely had a top hat and a long coat. Again, I could not see a face. There weren't any hands or feet. And excuse me if you do hear my dog starting to bark.
That's all right.
She's probably seeing a leaf moving outside. But yeah, that was as far as seeing something in that house, that had to have been one of the scarier moments. Now, I did see, I think I was a bit younger than that. When I was sitting outside I had a big swing set, trapeze. I had the whole, 9 yards out there. And I was sitting out there one day up on my monkey bars. And we had a deck across the back of the house, an upper level deck. And I saw a lady, again, in period dress. So she was in a bright blue bustle dress, and she had blonde hair, and she was there and gone.
Did you say this was the same house?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So there was definitely a couple of, I saw a woman, I saw this other man. But other than that, a lot of things just happening in the house that were really difficult to explain and sometimes very scary because you can't see what's causing the disruption. And I know from my mother, she really struggled with, believing that somebody was just coming in because we had a walkout basement as well. So I remember we left, me and my sisters, to go stay with my aunt for a summer. And when we came back, Mom had taken us to lunch and told us that we were not to remove the screwdrivers that were jammed under the downstairs doors because she believed somebody was coming in. And then she explained some of the things that were happening in the house. And so those screwdrivers stayed there, but those things still continued to happen.
Was it sort of something like a mild poltergeist phenomenon?
Yeah, things, the TV being turned on and off down in the family room, channels changing, and then she'd hear doors open and close and somebody being in the house, and then she'd go to look for something and nothing would be there. But nothing was ever disrupted, which made this seem very unlikely that somebody would just walk into the house and then turn around and walk out.
Any history with the house of deaths or anything like that? Was it an old house?
This house was built by my parents. Okay. It was in a subdivision that at that time was a brand new subdivision. That's not to say that the land at some point wasn't used for something.
Right.
There definitely was, when Dad cleared the driveway to pave it, there were what appeared to be animal bones there, but we're talking like cattle.
Right.
So maybe it had been a farm, or maybe, we don't know.
Okay. It's very hard to trace those things down anyway. Sometimes people say that, antique collectors will bring things into the house, and sometimes supposedly, and I don't know, the ghost thing is not my expertise, but sometimes people will say that certain spirits or whatever are simply transient and they'll show up in a house and move on, whatever their origins might be. Now, they say that, young children of a certain age are more sensitive, and sometimes they grow out of this. Now, apparently you didn't completely grow out of, if you've been an experiencer of the odd and the paranormal all your life, you didn't really ever grow out of this?
No, I didn't. It's been pretty consistent for the majority of my life. I mean, there's times in my life, I think, between, when you take your when your focus and your mind has to get, stay on something else for the sake of, maybe a trauma that you're going through, you might not notice something so much. But these things never really left me. In fact, it probably created some conflict between me and my ex-husband for a while, because I remember at one point, when his confusion and frustration with some of the stuff that was going on, that and he was aware that I had these experiences for a long time, where I remember him saying, "This is your fault. You brought this in." And then at the same time, a couple weeks later, telling me this stuff isn't real, but he was experiencing this stuff as well. So yeah, when I left the house, I left very young. I was 18 years old when we got married, and we had our first apartment, which was above a store downtown Lapeer. And now downtown Lapeer is, very old town, and these buildings were very, very old as well. And I remember in our first apartment, which was a 1-bedroom apartment, I could see straight down the hallway and right into the living room. And I woke up in the middle of the night to whispering. And when I opened my eyes, I did one of those rub your eyes, kind of, blink a few times. What am I looking at? But it was 2 women, one sitting on the sofa, the other one bent over and was serving her tea. And they were just whispering to each other.
Oh man! And how did you react? I know how I would have reacted, but how did you process that?
This is very strange to me, because when I think about this, what can you do? I wasn't going to get out of bed. I froze. I was afraid to move. And so pretty much I closed my eyes and honestly went back to sleep. That's kind of how I strangely have dealt with some of these other things.
That's actually very common with people that have, UFO experience. Missy Lamontagne, she and her husband saw this strange triangular craft pass low over their property, and they looked at it and thought, "Oh, that's interesting," and then they went back to bed. Later on, a lot of times later on, people process it and think, "Man, was that weird."
Yeah, speaking to that, something UFO type, back when I was just about 18, just shy of my 18th birthday. And I was leaving a friend's house really late at night. Now, really late, I mean, at 17 years old, this wasn't really late, but it was between 11:30 and midnight. That was late for me. And so I left her house. Now, I did not go to her. I didn't drive to her house on a regular basis. In fact, I didn't have a driver's license for a long time. Ma said she couldn't keep track of me on foot, so she would never keep track of me in a car.
Yeah, no GPS locators in those days.
Exactly. And they would have needed one with me. So I went over to a friend's house. She was kind of out in the sticks. And so this was not a familiar, habitual kind of drive, like when you're going to work or somebody that you visit frequently. But I was leaving her house, and you had to do a lot of zigzagging on these dirt roads, and there were a lot of curves, and it was really dark there. And I was probably only on the road, 5-10 minutes. And we're talking about a drive that takes roughly 30-40 minutes from her house to mine. And all of a sudden, just sleepiness took over me, an uncontrollable sleepiness, which wasn't normal for me. And I just wanted to shut my eyes. And so my eyes would shut, and then I would startle and wake up, and, because I'm in an area that if I fell asleep, I'm going to hit a tree for sure. And then I don't remember how I got home. That shook me up, because all of a sudden I went from my eyes just closing and almost having this thought of, it's okay if you go to sleep. But it wasn't, you know better. And to all of a sudden I'm in my driveway. And it startled me. It startled me when I realized where I was. And I sat there for a second in my car. My heart was pounding. I kept, my thoughts are racing. How did I get here? How did I get here? And so I got out of my car. We didn't have cell phones then. I didn't have a clock in my little Chevette that I owned. And I just wanted to focus on getting in the house, not waking up my parents, and just going to bed.
And did you see anything else? You're driving along, you get drowsy. Do you hear or see anything else?
I have no memory of anything else other than just I fell asleep driving and was trying to stay awake, and that was it.
So it's almost like a UFO missing time experience without actually seeing the UFO.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Again, that was one of those experiences that I wasn't into the UFO stuff back then. I didn't talk about it. I wasn't, necessarily sitting there looking for anything. When I was younger, way younger, and I would sit out there on my little swing set jungle gym thing, my friends thought I was weird because I would just stare at the sky and look for things that moved. And I don't know why I did that, because nobody talked about those things back then. But that particular instance, that with me driving home, I kind of tucked that away into wow, that was one of those weird things. I must have just zoned out and made my way home. But that didn't seem realistic,
right,
really, for where I was, that area that I had to drive through. And so I went home and I went to bed, and that was that. I didn't even think about that again until a good year ago, where I think because now I'm hearing these conversations and started piecing together all these other weird activities that, again, I could never define. And when I start pulling those out and thinking about those and talking about those all kind of coincide with other things that other people have experienced, UFO related.
Right. One thing I want to point out here, Dr. Jalen Hynek, of course, he's in the news a lot lately with that the Project Blue Book TV show, which I have to say I'm not a great fan of, but I won't go there. There was a time where Dr. Hynek and Ted Phillips, who was one of his colleagues, they were very skeptical of people that would have repeat experiences, and they actually wouldn't even talk to people because they thought they had to have been making it up. But later on, they found out, and Dr. Hynek is long deceased, but Ted Phillips talks a lot about Hynek and being his colleague and so forth. But they came to the realization later on that, in fact, certain people are experiencers, and certain people will see. If you see a UFO, it's likely you will have a repeat experience, maybe several. John Keel, who I talk a lot about on this show, he was the one early on that not only saw the interconnectedness of all paranormal phenomena, but he talked about people. He hypothesized something he called the super spectrum, and certain people were just more naturally tuned in for whatever reason, a certain percent of the population, to that, and they were people that would experience not only UFOs but might experience cryptids, haunting phenomena, and so forth. So at least we have made some advances in recognizing that there are people that are repeat experiencers. Now, I'm not. I've had a couple of weird things happen. I encountered what I call a possessed TV set in a motel room once after I was in the TNT area, which is where the Mothman was seen. I came back from an excursion out there at night, opened up the door to the motel, the TV set turned on by itself, and started flipping through channels. And wow. I thought, okay, now see, this isn't supposed to happen to me. So I did what any intrepid paranormal investigator would do: is I unplugged the TV set and went to bed. See, I did the same kind of reaction, like, okay, what do you do? I'm not going to call a clergyman in to do an exorcism. I'm going to try and get some sleep. But so what other things that may be a little different than, say, the haunting type phenomena have you experienced?
Yeah, I want to say first that I'm really glad that you brought that up about, later them just kind of coming to the conclusion that there are experiencers that experience multiple things, because that is part of what really ate at me. And after a while started to feel a little like maybe something was just, maybe my mind's doing something different. Maybe there's a more logical, reason for this, and that I'm just seeing it wrong. And so I stopped talking about it. And there's very few people that, you really can talk to unless you are actively involved in a community like that.
Right. But just to interrupt you for a second, that's not a bad thing, though, to try to, because sometimes we can work out, what's really going on. Perhaps sometimes things we think are paranormal or strange really aren't. But, so it's not a bad thing. But I understand you were, in a situation where there were actually very strange things that were happening to you, and you were having a hard time dealing with it.
Yeah, I was really starting to doubt myself. And, with me having a background in a very scientific field with behavior analysis, that is all, research based and something that's measurable. And, them being surrounded in that atmosphere, I really started to struggle in my own head, because I have a great passion for science and facts, but at the same time, there weren't any actual facts. There was nothing tangible for me to prove that these things were happening within myself. So I had a battle within myself going on. Now, luckily, I had an outlet for that by way of my buddy, Amber Rose Hammond. And she and I get together frequently, or we did when she was living on this side of the state. And so that helped me quite a bit to be able to have a friend that didn't look at me as though I was nuts. Now, she was also great at looking at the big picture and saying, well, maybe this, or what about this? So very much helpful for me to get that balance of staying grounded with it, but also feeling heard. So, but those people in my world were very few and far between. So it does feel good to be able to talk about this and now have a community of people that are very helpful to me. As far as any other experiences go, I'll tell you about this one. And I know I've shared it with you, but for the other listeners, I love to hike. And there's a nice county park out in Grand Haven called Rosie Mound. And
now, for those that don't know, that Grand Haven is on the west side of the Lower Peninsula.
Yes.
Not too far north. Not even halfway up the mitten, I wouldn't say.
Right.
Right. Okay. Just to kind of give people an idea, and it's a beautiful area, by the way.
Oh, it's gorgeous. Yes. So I like to go out there. It's always felt like a nice, safe area for me to venture out by myself. So I would go out to the county park. That park has man-made trails throughout because they don't want people eroding the dunes. So they have some nice trails and a lot of stairs. And so I would go out there, get some good exercise, and also be out in nature. But I was out there one day. It's not uncommon to go out there and have it be, pretty empty of people, and which is both good and bad sometimes. But this day it was very lovely. It was very sunny. There was nobody out there. And I was just on a mission to get my walk in and climb the stairs. And so I was pretty much flying through that park that day. And I go down this set of stairs, and there's this little wooden walkway that curves around, and it goes back into this wooded section and has a little stopping point in front of a big dune. And I get down the stairs and I start to head around the curve that's going to go out into the woods. And in the distance, there's a bunch of beach grass. And then another hill, and when you go over that hill, there's the water. But anyway, through this beach grass, all of a sudden, something on two legs went flying by. I caught it out of my peripheral vision, and when I turned my head, I got a glimpse of it. It had two legs, it had two arms, and at first my mind's saying, "Is that a naked person? Did I just scare a naked person?" But this thing was very different looking. It resembled a human in that it had two arms and two legs and a head, but everything on it was very skinny, pencil-like with points to it, which was very strange. And it was moving very, very fast. So I caught this in a very, it was very quick.
Could you tell if it was wearing any clothing?
None.
Okay.
So it had a tannish color to it, like a honey kind of tannish color. So I thought, I caught a naked person out here. That's kind of creepy. But the rate at which it moved couldn't have been human. It just didn't make sense. And the fact that it could leap like numerous feet in one big stride, it was very graceful, but it had very pointy, feet. Hands and feet. It was very strange.
What about like shoulders, elbows? I mean, did you get that, look that closely or?
No, it was moving way too fast. So when it would leap, I could see these long, super skinny, pointy legs, and the same with the arms. And its face was even a little pointy looking. But I couldn't see any eyes, anything like that. It just went flying. So, kind of like one of those moments of what do you do? I mean, I was afraid to move too fast because I didn't know what it was. And I stopped dead in my tracks. I did this little shimmy really slow, turned around, took a deep breath, and just thought, keep walking. So I turned around and went back the direction I came from. And it felt like it was going to take me forever because at that point I have a stairway that I don't know how many stairs there are, well over 100. Let's just put it that way. And I had to get up those. There was no problem. I didn't run out of breath. It was pretty nice. I just went. But
I'm sure you didn't stick around long enough to see if it disturbed left any tracks or disturbed any of the ground around it?
No, because number one, I didn't. I just wanted to get out of there.
I don't blame you. I just was just curious.
So when I did the turnaround, though, what was interesting was in that moment that I paused to breathe. Now we're talking. This thing was, I don't know how many feet away. It was at quite a distance, and it was running away from me. So when I turned around and went and took that deep breath and started walking again, I heard what sounded like a human breathing, like heavy breathing, coming from a bush, probably about 5-6 feet behind me. So it moved that quickly. And it didn't do anything. I didn't turn around to look to see who was heavy breathing in the bush. I just kept walking at that point. But I've went back out there, not alone since. So.
No, I wouldn't either.
But I'm curious. And I was definitely focused that day, definitely in my head, not looking for anything, just wanted to get my walk in. And so it was really interesting, a really interesting and very scary experience at that moment, just mainly because I was by myself.
I guess we would put it under the general heading of a unknown cryptid. There are cryptids that seem to fall into certain categories, like Bigfoot type creatures, the dog man, and so forth, even a chupacabra. But every once in a while, if you go through the literature, you'll find something like this that just doesn't seem to fit anywhere. I have heard stories of these sort of skinny beings or whatever, but I don't know that this would fit that. It makes me think of John Keel when he first hypothesized the idea of window areas, because so many of these things just seem to come out of nowhere and then disappear. But credible people see them. Sometimes several people see them, and sometimes they even leave footprints and so forth. So that, yes, that's definitely a strange experience.
Yeah, that one definitely frightened me. And like I said, I haven't been back to the park. I have gone out there by myself, but I haven't gone that route by myself. I stay in the more public area if I don't have anybody to hike with me that day.
But I think you've had some even stranger experiences, and these we might put under the general heading of Men in Black. And can you tell us about those experiences?
Yeah. So
And
Okay.
let me just, for just a second, the Men in Black is, John Keel used it as a generic term. Sometimes it referred to men that seemed to be from the government, sometimes dressed like Air Force officers, but they weren't from the Air Force. And other times they just seemed to be very strange. They had unusual features. They would act or move in a very jerky motion and didn't really seem to be human. So it's a very broad category, but please don't conjure up images of the silly movies that were made with Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith. But anyway, go ahead with your story.
Well, that's a really good point, because I can tell you these two particular men that I encountered definitely weren't like the movie Men in Black. They were definitely the very first one. I believe I was, had to have been around 21-ish, somewhere around there, early 20s anyway. And I lived in a small town where, I knew several people. You grow up in that little tiny community and so many. And everybody in a particular area has a certain look. They have certain mannerisms. I don't know if you found that when you're out traveling around. You go to certain communities and everybody kind of looks the same.
Yes.
And in Lapeer, which is where I was from, we had the Kmart at the time, and I went into Kmart and had to go to the service desk, and it was dark out. So I get to the service desk, and I'm talking to the lady, and I was facing the very front window of the store. And there was a man standing in the window just staring at me, arms kind of extended out from his body. He was kind of an Eastern European look. He had very dark eyes, very dark hair. He was dressed in a dress shirt with a tie and a long trench coat, but he was just standing there, and he was so out of place. Because that's what caught my eye with him, and then plus the fact that he's just staring at me, and this was this dead stare. And I thought, well, that's a creepy guy. What is he doing here? So I start talking to the woman, kind of ignore him. And all of a sudden she says to me, I'm going to call somebody from the back, and I don't want you to leave the store until we have somebody here to walk you to your car. You seem to be, there's somebody following you. And then she described him. And I said, well, he was just standing outside the window. And it was strange because I don't know if anybody else in the store was thinking that there was an odd guy there who was ducking behind a rack of clothing, but she noticed him. So she got this kid from the back room who was even smaller than I was, and I can tell you I was probably a whole 100 pounds at the time. And he walked me to my car. And so that was one of those things of, wow, there's a scary man in, our area. And really that could just be that. Sure.
I mean, it could be, you've talked about this before, and you have a very good view of it, that, you weren't not, some people are investigating, UFOs and so forth, and these kind of events come up, but you weren't doing that at all. So there was you had no context for it. But whatever it was, at least somebody else saw him, and you knew you weren't crazy.
Well, I will say at that time, certain paranormal experiences would ramp up at certain times. And the more they ramped up, especially highly emotional charged ones, and there were some challenges going on in my life, and then more paranormal activity that was really kind of scary at the time was ramping up in the life of me, my husband, my ex-husband, and my children in this place that we lived. And so it coincided with that time, but I thought really nothing. I can't say I didn't think anything more about it, because obviously that stuck with me forever, because the feeling that was associated was so strange. He didn't fit in. And I knew there was something weird about it, but I could never pinpoint what that was. And I had absolutely no background, no interest in, UFO, hadn't even heard of a Men in Black. I had no idea. But it got stranger when years down the road, I'm over here in Muskegon. And again, lots going on in my world at that time. A great deal more paranormal activity in this house that we ended up living in. And I was coming back from wherever I was, I probably getting kids from school, got home, decided to go back out. Again, this is the funny part to me. I was going to another Kmart. And
there's a connection.
Apparently. But I stopped as I was coming into our street, there was a car parked at the stop sign. Dark-haired man, dark eyes. And the car wasn't, it was kind of a rusty thing, really. And I just thought we made eye contact and he did a full circle with his head to watch me drive. And I thought, ugh, creepy. And he wasn't a neighbor of ours or anything. So I took the kids home and then I went back and I stopped at the gas station around the corner and he was there just sitting in the corner of the parking lot, still staring at me. And I thought, wow, that's okay. So he went to the gas station, whatever. And I left there and then I went to Kmart. Now this one was really strange. And I got the feeling at this point, because that rush of that first one that I saw, that first man, that memory came back right then. And all of a sudden I felt this strange connection between the two of them.
How similar did they look?
Well, both had that Eastern European kind of look. But
that's kind of classic with a lot of the Men in Black lore, so to speak.
Is it?
But yeah, right.
Well, I get it to Kmart, and that particular Kmart had a gigantic parking lot because it was in kind of a plaza area, and some of the other stores were closed down, so it just had this gigantic parking lot. And it wasn't very well populated at all. So I pull in and I park, and when I got out of my car, in the distance in the parking lot where there weren't any other cars parked was just that man standing there. And his car wasn't even there. And he was, his dress, his attire definitely stood out because it almost didn't fit anything like our time period. He had a trench coat on.
Right.
But it was more like a leather long coat. He had boots on that were sort of resembled a combat looking type of boot. But he just stood there again with his arms kind of extended, very stiff. And I just froze staring at him, and he's just staring at me. And so I went to take one step forward. And this was the weird part. I took one step forward with my foot. He took one step forward with his foot. So I put my foot back. He put his foot back. He was mimicking my body movements. And then lucky for me, a car pulled up with this lovely elderly couple. And I thought, I'm going to wait for them to get out of the car and walk in with them. So they came up and they parked next to me. They got out of their car. I struck up conversation with this strange couple, all smiley, and then kept looking that direction. He disappeared. And I went into the store, and it was one of those, I stayed in the store for quite a while.
You mean he vanished, or he just didn't see him anymore?
Well, he wasn't there anymore. I turned around to look, and he was gone. Yeah. But he didn't have his car there.
Now, you were trying to put this into some kind of context and process this. And you sought out now Nick Redfern, who has written several books on the Men in Black from all aspects. And a lot of the things you said about these characters sound very much like some of the Men in Black phenomena. But so you sought out Nick Redfern, is that correct? Yeah,
after the UFO con last year, I thought I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to tell him the story of these two men in Facebook Messenger. Now, I wasn't friends with him or connected with him on Facebook. So you know how that goes. When you send a message, they may or may not see it. And Nick Redfern, I'm sure, is flooded with a lot of stories. I'm just assuming that. But I sent him my message, and a few days later, he responded. And that was just cool. I was ecstatic to have a response. And what was interesting, and I can't quote anything from his response, but his response was so matter of fact, like, yeah, these Men in Black. And so he responded in such a direct manner about the Men in Black. And I didn't specifically ask if they were men in black. I think I did mention that I had just read his book and thought, okay, after UFO Con, I snagged one of his books, read it. It was about the men in black. And I thought, my description doesn't exactly fit anything in this book, but there were a few things in the book that kind of made me really think about it. So I thought, well, I'll throw it out there, see what he says. Here's my story. And he responded matter-of-factly about the men in black. So that was really interesting. Still, I'm one of those people who's going to sit back and go, yeah, I really don't know. And they could just be weird men. I'm approached by people frequently who just will stop me to tell me their story. And I think that's just part of who I am. And so in my mind, I'm like, just another weird experience. But it stuck with me so much because it didn't fit the bill of anything else.
Right. But it seemed like Nick Redfern wasn't surprised, and he had encountered several experiences like this himself. I know that one of the books, he's written about 4 books on the Men in Black specifically, and in one of the books are strictly reports that he has gotten from people after he started writing about the Men in Black, people that contacted him. So it's a real phenomenon, and I don't know what to make of it. There's a lot there to talk about. But the only thing that makes me think that, well, perhaps these weren't just, like you say, they could just be some very strange people out there. But with your history of sort of attracting strange phenomena and having these experiences, it may be something else. It may be something that is truly paranormal.
Yeah, my feeling on these particular men, especially in the moment, like I told you before,
because you got a real vibe off these guys, right?
Yeah, I definitely feel things. I sometimes know things. And so in reading energy, I've had that capability for a while. So my vibe with that, my feeling with that was definitely that this was something that was not a normal weird experience. It wasn't just a weird person, but nothing that I could, definitely put a finger on or prove. So it just was a feeling, and it was very overwhelming. But I lost my train of thought on that one, but
that's right.
I started thinking about these men.
your approach to this is just very logical and rational. And it's like I say, it's very good that people like you have come forward to talk about these strange experiences so that other people can, like I say, breathe a sigh of relief and think, wow, we don't know really what's going on. We may not have explanations for a lot of these things, but if I'm crazy, then thousands of other people are, and that's not terribly likely.
Exactly. So yes, it's been very comforting to connect with more people, a community like that, and also to hear stories like Missy's, where I sit back and that made me feel very good about my own experiences, just hearing her talk too. So I was very grateful to be able to catch that episode.
Well, Marni, we're at the end of our time, and I hope you'll come back sometime and share more of your experiences. This has been a great hour. And what I'd like to do, you mentioned your friend Amber Rose. Amber is an author in her own right, and she's part of the Ghostly Talk crew, which I'll talk about sometime in the future because I pattern my show after what I call the Ghostly Talk model. And I think it would be great sometime if I could have Amber Rose on and with you as my co-host. I think that would be a blast.
Oh, that would be so much fun.
So, Marni, thank you so much for being on the High Strangeness Factor today.
Well, thank you for having me. This was an absolute pleasure. I had a lot of fun.
And sit tight. I want to talk to you a little bit after the show, but I'm going to do my quick closeout here. Again, I want to thank my guest, Marni Kriby, for being on the show. It was a good time. I also need to thank Irene Allen Block and Mark Johnson, and they are our fearless leaders here on the Paranormal UK radio network. Andy Mercer, my co-host, part-time co-host who couldn't make it tonight, a little under the weather, and he's also my full-time producer, makes the show work. The music, as always, is by Brian Zeller. You can also hear me on weekly as a correspondent on Mac Maloney's Military X-Files, which can also be heard on this network. And I am Steve Ward, your humble host here on the High Strangeness Factor, a displaced Yank on Paranormal UK Radio. Thanks for listening. I will see you all again in a fortnight. Take care.